Arratsaldeon, ongi etorri denoi museora. Bienvenidos a esta sesión de Literaktum, Visiones de la Novela. Ya en la recta final del festival tenemos el honor de contar con el escritor irlandés John Banville, considerado uno de los mejores escritores contemporáneos en lengua inglesa. Autor de una obra extensa caracterizada por la precisión en analizar la condición humana. ¿Perdón? Decía que su obra está caracterizada por analizar con precisión la condición humana con todos sus matices, como hemos podido leer en las novelas, en muchas de sus novelas, como El mar o más recientemente La guitarra azul. También ha publicado numerosas novelas policíacas bajo el seudónimo de Benjamin Black, y por ambos, por Banville y por Black, se ha visto reconocido por premios tan prestigiosos como el Booker, el Princesa de Asturias de las Letras, el Kafka o el premio RBA de novela negra. Además de Banville y Black, tenemos también la suerte de contar con otra escritora, puesto que quien la acompaña es Nuria Barrios. Ella es su traductora, tanto de Banville como de Benjamin Black. Es doctora en filosofía y narradora y poeta y colaboradora habitual en diversos medios de comunicación. Es autora de novelas como Amores patológicos, El alfabeto de los pájaros o de relatos como 8 centímetros. Y además ha publicado poemarios como El hilo del agua y La luz de la dinamo, por el que ha recibido el premio Hermanos Machado este mismo año. Como ven, todo un lujo literario para esta tarde. Tras la charla, que tendrá aproximadamente una duración de 40-45 minutos, podrán ustedes intervenir y preguntarle a ellos lo que quieran, lo que deseen. Y luego también podrán firmar libros. La conversación se podrá seguir en streaming y en versión original, y próximamente subiremos a la web en euskera y en castellano también. Así que nada más. Thank you very much. Y ahora os toca a vosotros. Muchas gracias.
Hola, buenas tardes a todos. Yo, ante todo, quería darle las gracias a John Banville por haber venido aquí. Quería darles las gracias a todos ustedes por haber venido a escucharnos y, por supuesto, quiero dar las gracias al Museo San Telmo que acoge esta conversación. Yo, como ha dicho María Luisa Valenciaga, soy escritora, pero esta tarde estoy aquí como la traductora de John Banville. Ser su traductora a mí me hace estar muy cerca de él, pero al mismo tiempo también me hace estar muy cerca de todos ustedes, porque un traductor fundamentalmente es un lector, y ustedes son todos lectores. Un traductor es un lector atentísimo, es alguien que lee la obra que debe traducir prestando atención al más mínimo detalle para captar el sentido del texto que debe traducir, para poder transmitir su sentido. Decía Octavio Paz que la traducción era una función especializada de la literatura, casi un género literario. Y hay un escritor también muy conocido que se llama Andrés Neumann, que, bromeando con la cercanía de la traducción al género literario, dice que una traducción no es sino una ficción basada en hechos lingüísticos reales. A mí además me gustaría añadir que una traducción es un acto de amor, porque en ella es fundamental el dificilísimo equilibrio entre la fidelidad al autor y la libertad del traductor. Traducir es una escuela, para mí es la mejor escuela de lectura que existe, también es la mejor escuela de escritura. He aprendido muchísimo traduciendo a John Banville. Tengo la suerte de traducir a un autor que ha creado una obra muy inteligente, escrita con la densidad y la profundidad de la poesía, y que trata de temas que nos tocan a todos. Habla de la identidad, habla de la memoria, habla del amor, habla de la soledad, habla de la fugacidad del tiempo, habla del conflicto entre la realidad y la y la imaginación. Decía George Steiner, hablando de John Banville, que era el escritor más inteligente y más sofisticado que hay en lengua inglesa. A mí, antes de darles unas breves pinceladas biográficas sobre él, me gustaría citar una frase que me gusta mucho de él. Él dice: perseguimos la perfección y nunca la alcanzamos. Tal como decía Beckett, fracasa de nuevo, fracasa mejor. Bueno, voy a darle unas breves pinceladas biográficas y empezaremos la conversación en inglés. Tal como ha dicho María Luisa Valenciaga, a continuación habrá unos 10 minutos de preguntas del público, bueno, lo que ustedes deseen preguntar, el tiempo que necesiten. Bueno, John Banville nació en Wexford, que es una pequeña ciudad al sureste de Irlanda. Es el menor de 3 hermanos, fue bautizado católico, pero dejó de creer en la adolescencia. Pero la religión es un dato importante porque la Iglesia tiene una presencia constante en sus novelas. Los turbios tejemanejes, los lazos de la Iglesia con el poder, la pederastia largamente encubierta. No fue a la universidad por decisión propia, trabajó como corrector en el periódico The Irish Press y luego como editor en The Irish Times. Él trabajaba de editor por la noche y no sé si lo sabía o no, pero en realidad siguió al pie de la letra el consejo que daba Graham Greene, que decía que para alguien que desea escribir no hay mejor oficio que el de ser un editor periodístico, un corrector periodístico, porque eso te permite, ese trabajo te permite trabajar durante el día, escribir durante el día, que es cuando tienes tu mejor energía, y luego por la noche, cuando has acabado de escribir, vas al periódico a trabajar. Bueno, Banville, a pesar de su éxito, ha mantenido su contacto con la prensa y mantiene una colaboración regular como crítico literario con el Guardian y el New York Times. Con 25 años publica su primera obra, que es un libro de relatos, pero sería 6 años más tarde cuando se da a conocer con una novela que se llama Copérnico. Una novela que sería el comienzo de lo que más tarde se conocería como la tetralogía científica. Los títulos que la forman son Copérnico, Kepler, la carta de Newton, y Mefisto. Con Copérnico, la primera novela de la tetralogía, además, ganaría el primer premio de una larguísima lista de premios. Como es tan larga la lista, yo solamente voy a citar 3, todos son muy importantes, pero voy a citar hoy 3 por su carácter simbólico. Uno es el premio Booker, que es el premio en lengua inglesa más prestigioso que existe. A ese premio él ha sido finalista con el libro de las pruebas y luego fue ganador con El mar. El segundo premio que voy a citar es el Príncipe de Asturias y el tercero es el premio Franz Kafka, y lo cito porque, aparte de ser un premio muy importante, tiene la leyenda de que es la antesala al premio Nobel. Yo apuesto porque en este caso también va a ser verdad. De todos los libros, como Banville él es un escritor muy prolífico, ha escrito 16 novelas con el nombre de John Banville. De las 16 voy a citar solamente unas pocas: Eclipse, Imposturas, El intocable, Antigua luz, La guitarra azul, Birchwood, que acaba de ser reeditado en Alfaguara, y La señora Osmond, que ha aparecido ya, ha sido publicado ya en inglés, pero aparecerá el próximo mes de mayo también en la editorial Alfaguara. En 2006 empieza a escribir novela negra con un nuevo nombre, con el nombre de Benjamin Black. Aunque él siempre es un poco irónico y condescendiente con su alter ego, la realidad es que Benjamin Black se ha convertido en un personaje importante y tiene tantos o quizá más seguidores que él. Ha escrito con el nombre de Benjamin Black, ha escrito 11 novelas y también ha recibido premios muy importantes, entre ellos, o por lo menos, además de importantes, bien dotados, entre ellos el premio RBA de novela negra por la última novela como Benjamin Black, se llama Pecado. El premio RBA es el premio mejor dotado de este género en español, en lengua española, 125.000 euros. Así que, bueno, puede que Benjamin Black no sea tan virtuoso como Banville, pero desde luego se hace querer. no solamente trae dinero a casa, sino que además sus novelas han sido llevadas a la televisión. La BBC ha adaptado la serie del patólogo, que es el protagonista, que se llama Quirk, con un protagonista, con el actor protagonista que es Gabriel Byrne. Aunque a él le gusta distinguir el estilo de John Banville al de Benjamin Black, la realidad es que Benjamin Black ha conseguido quedarse vinculado a él. Contaré únicamente como anécdota que cuando le dieron el premio Príncipe de Asturias, el jurado, al darle el premio, dijo lo siguiente, que le daban el premio tanto por su inteligente, honda y original creación novelesca, como por sus turbadoras y críticas novelas policíacas. Con esto voy a empezar la conversación en inglés y, tal como les digo, cuando terminemos habrá un tiempo para que ustedes le pregunten. Hello, John.
Hello. Thank you.
Well, some years ago, you were invited to contribute to an anthology of 6-word stories. Your contribution was the following: should have lived more, written less. Do you think you would have had a better life if you hadn't written so much?
Well, I would have had a better human life, but artists don't want to be human. We just want to make works of art. Would I have been happier? Would I have been better? Would I have been nicer to my children if I hadn't written? Perhaps so. But the wonderful thing about one's loved ones, one's family, one's children, is that they forgive us. They forgive us our awfulness, our cannibalism. I was driving once somewhere with my wife when we were together first, and we were young. And we were having one of those fights that one has when couples have when they're together first, trying to adjust to each other. My wife was in such full rhetorical flight, telling me what a swine I was, and how dreadful I was, and how inhuman I was. And I said to her, "That's wonderful. Can I use that?" And she said, "You're even more of a monster than I thought." And I said, "I know, but can I use it?" And she said, "Oh, all right." It was a great lesson to me and to her not to expect a conventional life, to expect a life in which everything would be used. Would I have been happier if I didn't write? My wife also said to me a few years ago, I said, "You know, I'm going to give this up." And she said, "But what would you do then? You'd go into politics and destroy the world."
Well, as Benjamin Black, you have just won the RBA Crime Nobel Prize with Sin, Pecado. So let's start by talking about Benjamin Black. You've always been a bit condescending about Black. You have said of him, he's an artisan, he's a rogue, he's an entertainment. Has Black's success improved your view of him?
Oh, it's unfair to say that I've been condescending. I have been dismissive, perhaps, but that's different to condescending. I admire Black as a craftsman. I admire his lack of pretension, his ability to content himself with plot, dialogue, character, all those things that Banville is not really interested in. Banville wants to make some kind of poetry out of this very clumsy form, which is the novel. The novel is a clumsy and vulgar form, and all the better for it. I mean, if all novels were art novels, the novel would have died a long time ago. So Benjamin Black writes my novels for me, and I can then do something else, which is try to make poetry.
let me talk about the Nobel Prize, or the N Prize, as you call it. It is said that when you published your first novel as Benjamin Black, Pristine Falls, you said to your wife, "There goes the Nobel Prize." Is that true?
Well, you'd have to ask those strange people in Stockholm that question. I don't know. It seems to be arbitrary. When I think of the writers who didn't win the Nobel Prize, my bosom swells with pride. Joyce didn't win it. Proust didn't win it. Rilke didn't win it. Nabokov didn't win it. Beckett, by some strange accident, did win it. We shouldn't be so fixated on the Nobel Prize. I mean, I'd like to have the money. I've often thought of writing to them and saying, look, they tell me that you're going to give me this prize someday. Could I have the money now?
Well,
if that goes on Twitter, I will never get the Nobel Prize. Right?
You're always on the list of the candidates of the Nobel Prize, and I wonder if that's a good omen or a curse for a writer.
I don't think about it except every October when it's given to some completely talentless idiot, and I'm enraged for about 15 minutes, and then I go back to work.
Well, let's go back to Benjamin Black, to Sin, to your last Benjamin Black's novel. Sin starts with a priest who has been murdered and emasculated in the house of a wealthy Irishman. It's a very powerful start. Your novels, especially the Benjamin Black novels, are highly critical of the Catholic Church, describing it as riddled with corruption and child molesting. Has the Catholic Church responded in any way to this?
Well, I'm sure that they would put out a fatwa on me if there was such a thing as a fatwa in the Catholic Church. No, something that I admire the Catholic Church for is indifferent to people like me. It's indifferent to criticism. They wait for their time to come back, and it will come back. When there's some catastrophe and people will find God again. I remember when the Cuban Missile Crisis was going on in 1962 or whatever it was, and I was working for the airline, and I noticed that all these people had disappeared from the office. And I asked the manager, I said, where have they gone? He said, they've gone to confession. And so when they came back, I said, but you don't believe in this. And he said, no, but we believe in insurance policies. Which seemed to me outrageous. I was utterly shocked. The notion of them believing in a God who would say, oh, they're in fear of their death, so they're coming to me. What kind of God would that be? It would be a very petty God. And I'd like to think of, I think it was Karl Barth, the great theologian, who said, what kind of God would it be who would concern himself with us? So I'm getting round to making a distinction between religion and the church. A friend of mine, the English philosopher John Gray, says, and I agree with him, neither of us believes in God, but he says religion is a wonderfully poetic version of life. It's a poetic interpretation, and I think that's true. The problem is that the church, which was run entirely by men who went into the seminary when they were very young, knew nothing about life, and became little gods on earth. I remember when I was a little boy in Wexford, I was walking behind a priest on the pavement, and coming towards him was a woman wheeling a pram, baby in a pram, and she was hugely pregnant, and she got off the pavement, to let the priest pass by. It's the institution that I hate, loathe. I would love to have religion, I would love to have the comfort, and I would love to have the benefit of that poetic version of life. I can't do it. But as I say, I have nothing against people who believe, but the church itself had become such a monolith and such a power structure that it deserves to fall. But it's too rich to fall. It's like, you know, they used to say when the crash came that Spain was too big to be allowed to go broke. The church is the same. It's too big, it's too rich, it's too powerful. And of course, when it lost us in the first world, it moved out into the third world. It's now huge in China. Catholic Church taking over China. Communists, and of course, as we know, communism and Catholicism, two sides of the same coin.
But would you say that the church has changed in Ireland?
Well,
since the 1950s,
The church has gone underground. It's gone into the catacombs. You never see a priest in the street in Ireland anymore. I mean, obviously there are priests going about, but they're dressed in civilian clothes. But I always say you can always recognize them by the fact that they always wear white socks. Look out for the white socks and you know it's a priest. Look, I feel sorry for them. I was at a christening last year and the priest was talking to me about it. He said, you know, I feel betrayed. You know, he said, I've lived my life as a priest. I've tried to do good. I've tried to be decent. He said, I'm not pretending to be a saint. But he said, you know, he said, now I'm ashamed. And I thought it was terribly moving. I felt, here's this poor man who was in his 60s, and his life had been, he realized his life, how would I say, that everything that he felt that was decent had been taken from him.
What do you think of the present Pope?
I was in, where is he from? Is he Brazilian or Argentinian?
Argentinian.
Argentinian. Sorry,
like your publisher.
I always get mixed up. I have a friend who was a diplomat and he was being posted to Brazil and he spent 6 months learning Spanish. Bad mistake. So I get mixed up. But a friend of mine was talking about the Pope and said, down here we call him the alpinist. I said, why? He said, he's the greatest climber that there ever was. He climbed his way to the top. He's a Jesuit, you know. And somebody from Argentina interviewed him and said, when you were in Argentina, you weren't so genial and so loving and so, you know, all-embracing as you are now. And he said, it must be divine grace. He's another fraud. They're all frauds. It's a power structure. It's all about power, and it's about male power.
We go back.
Sorry, I shouldn't say about.
Yeah.
I hate saying about. In English, this is a terrible cliche. It has to do with power and male power.
That's because of me. I'm contaminating your English.
No, you aren't.
Well, I go back to Banville and Black. You are John Banville, you are Benjamin Black, initially as you are ambidextrous. You thought about writing the Black novels with the left hand and Banville's novels with your right hand. Well, this sense of a double life is reflected in your literary and personal life. 2 writing names, 2 wives, 2 sets of children, 2 sons from your first wife, 2 daughters from your second wife. Well, in your case, that duplicity is obviously a sign of creativity. But I wonder if you are ever afraid that it might be a sign of multiple personality.
Perhaps so. Obviously, I have a great desire for symmetry. 2 wives, 2 sons, 2 daughters, 2 personae. But I'm now thinking about taking on another pen name. So I'll have to grow another hand, another brain, a third prehensile thing to make myself triplicate. Look, we're all multiple personalities. I always use the analogy that the man who gets up from the bed of his lover and goes into the street and meets his worst enemy, they're 2 entirely different people. I'm a different person talking to you tonight. We spoke the other night in Granada. We were different people then. And this is the wonderful thing about human beings, that we make ourselves, we remake ourselves at every moment. If we were the same person all the time, just imagine how boring it would be. Imagine how dull it would be. All these robots walking around, all the same. We invent. We are extraordinarily inventive creatures. And the first thing that we invent is ourselves. We reinvent it over and over and over again. So I could be Fernand Pessoa, you know, I could be 20. Georges Simenon forgot how many pseudonyms he had. You know, if I were younger, I'd invent, you know, another 10 people. Your question is, do I fear multiple personalities? I'd love to be.
Well, this fixation about 2. But anyway, I was going...
Yes, I mean, I did have this fantasy, and I thought I was unique in this when I was young. I was convinced I was the survivor of a pair of twins, and that the other one had died, and my mother hadn't told me about it. Then I realized that almost everybody has this fantasy, that, you know, there's a side of them that's lost. And you know, the beautiful thing in Ovid, where, you know, the separated halves are looking for each other, and they, you know, the man and the woman find each other, and they become one for a brief period. So maybe I'm looking for my lost half. God forbid that I should ever meet him. He'd be even worse than I am.
Last question about Black, because I want to go to Banville. Have you ever thought about finishing him off? Getting rid of Benjamin Black?
Oh, every time I finish a Benjamin Black book, I think that's the last one. But then I get interested in the characters again, and I get drawn back to them. It's like leaving a party that started out really well, and everybody was happy, and you were falling in love with everybody, and then around 3 in the morning, it's just so dull, and you've been through drunkenness, and you become sober, and you leave it, and you think never again. And then next week, you get invited to another party, you think, of course, and you go back to the party. So I keep going back to the wild party that is Benjamin Black.
So we go now. We are going to focus on John Banville.
Oh God, must be. All right.
We're going to talk about the writer, the artist. You define yourself as a writer who strives for perfection. What's perfection for you? And there's a second question. You can ask any order. Is there any such a thing as the perfect novel?
Oh, no.
And if so, which?
No. We can't have perfection. We're imperfect beings. No matter how hard we try and how well we do, we will never achieve perfection. That's why we keep going on. The English novelist Iris Murdoch was asked, why did she write so many novels? And she said, because I think each new one will exonerate me for the ones that have gone before. I feel like that too. I feel the next one will be a masterpiece of the ages. That, 1,000 years from now, if the race survives, all the other authors will have gone, And there'll still be this next glowing, luminous masterpiece that I'm going to write. That'll be the one that will live. I know, rationally, that it's just going to be another damn book. But when I'm starting out, I feel I'm going to achieve something miraculous. And, you know, if I did get it right, I would then give it up. And I'd then go into politics, and God help us all.
The other day, when we were in Granada, you said something very puzzling and very interesting at the same time. We were talking about the fact that when the British left Ireland in the 1920s, they left the language behind. And you said, I wrote it down, we made English a new language. That was our revenge on the conquerors. And then, immediately after, you added, I don't feel at home in the English language. So I thought, presumably your parents and your grandparents spoke English at home. Why don't you feel at home with English when you are writing in English, when you speak English?
Well, first of all, the Irish language, Gaelic, is a very oblique and very poetic language. It's almost impossible to make direct statements in the Irish language. You can't say, for instance, I am a man. All you can say is something like, I am in my manness. You can't say no in Irish. There's no word for no. You can say, ni ha, it is not so. But there's no word for no. I often think girls must have had a lot of problems when the Irish language was still in use. Anyway, it's a joke that nobody's going to get out, you see. It's a very poetic, very oblique, very beautiful language. The loss of it for us was a disaster, an absolute disaster. But we made the best of it. We were given English and we took it. And as we said the other night, we made something new out of it. And look what we did with it. Look at the writers that we produced.
Yeah, incredible. James Joyce, Samuel Beckett,
Joyce, Beckett, Yeats,
Oscar Wilde,
George Bernard Shaw. We took that language and we enriched it. And we made it ambiguous. We loved the ambiguity of language. An English novelist will try to follow George Orwell's recommendation that prose should be like a clear pane of glass, that you look through at what is being said, at the ideas, the concepts. We love the notion that language is a lens. Lenses distort, they bring closer, they make distant, they distort, but they are beautifully polished. That's what we did with the English language. We took it and we polished it and we burnished it and we made something new out of it. It doesn't present reality, and I say this in quotation marks, it doesn't present reality as it is. But who knows what reality is as it is? We give a version of the world that is poetic, it's dense, it's thick with the ambiguousness of being alive. None of us, we don't know ourselves, we don't know who we are, we don't know what we are, we don't know why we're here. It's a constant bafflement, well, I can only speak for myself. It's a constant bafflement to me that I'm here on this strange, beautiful, exquisite, terrible planet. I've never got used to being here. I never get used to... Somebody was complaining to me the other day about rain, and I said, look, rain is a miracle. You're walking along the street and suddenly water is falling on you out of the sky. This is miraculous. I say, you look up into the sky, you're looking into infinity. And then these things come up, this like cannon smoke from some distant battle. Clouds absolutely fascinate me. I never ever get used to them. I find myself, I used to work in the newspapers and I would drive into the office at about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And in the autumn, and an Irish autumn is exquisite, you get these beautiful skies that have all been painted by Poussin. And I used to drive along looking at the sky and I thought, someday I'm going to be killed. And they say, poor Banville, he was killed looking at the sky. I just don't get used to it. I don't think any of us get used to it. We have to get on with life. We have to live here. But it is still an absolute mystery to me as to why we're here, what we're doing here, what we are while we're here. And that's why I try to make art, to try to not explain it, but to account for it.
John, well, let me phrase my question in a different way. What's your relationship with English?
I'm a stranger in the language. I look at it from the outside. English to us is, I mean, look, it's the language of Shakespeare. It's a wonderfully impure language. It has, you know, German is quite pure, Italian is quite pure, Spanish is quite pure. English is a mongrel. It has bits from everywhere, and it is infinitely rich, but it's not my native language. It may be my mother tongue.
What's your native language?
I don't know. I don't know. That's a good place for an artist to be, because I'm continually questioning the medium that I'm working in. I gave you the example the other night,
yeah,
that I feel a certain affinity with Nabokov, for instance, who his first language wasn't in English. And in Lolita, I don't know if the interpreter can manage this, but in Lolita, Humbert talks about the, well, I have plenty here, it's not thirst, it's the difficulty of expression. Humbert talks about the first young man who took away Lolita's virginity. And he says about him, he said, he was the rapist, I am the therapist. And only somebody from outside the language would recognize that the rapist and therapist, all you have to do is take away the joining and you have this word. Pure genius, but genius, only somebody outside the language could see that. I apologize to the interpreter.
Well, as you just mentioned, Lolita, I was talking about the family. I want to ask you about traumas. Auden said that children should be loaded with as much trauma as they can bear, because it's good for them. That must be certainly true of children who are going to turn out to be artists. So what were your trauma childhood?
Well, my trauma in childhood was that I had a happy childhood. The worst thing that could happen to an artist. Seamus Heaney told me a wonderful anecdote, that he was in Finland and he was having a conversation with one of those extremely gloomy Finnish poets. And the Finnish poet said, I'm having terrible problems with my parents. I hate them, and I can't get rid of them. They refuse to die, and they're destroying my life. And it's making me so unhappy. And he said to Seamus, what about you? And Seamus said, well, I quite like my parents. And the Finnish poet said, oh, you really have a problem. Seamus always told that story against himself. Yes, I think that children should be taught. Look, children should be loved, but they should be taught how terrible the world is as well, to shield them from that knowledge. Anyway, look, there's no such thing as children. There are these small adults who pretend to be children in order not to embarrass their parents. Right? By the time you're 11 or 12, you know everything. You know? You've probably seen your parents making love, or you've seen somebody doing it, or you know everything. But you pretend not to know it, so that this will save them from being, embarrassed. It's a wonderful agreement between the little stunted adults and the grown-up children. We never cease to be children. We never grow up. I certainly think that's true of men. I've come to think that women grow up, but men certainly don't. I look at my two sons, who now are older than I am. They're in their mid-40s, and I see that look still in their eyes where they're saying, where did she go? Where did my mother go? I know she's still around here, but I lost that mother when I was about 4. What happened? Whereas girls, maybe they're in love with their fathers, but they know how ridiculous their fathers are, that they're just grown-up children. And I watched my 2 daughters when they got to be about 10 or 11. I could see them looking around the world and thinking, oh, yeah, I see how to do this. I see how to do this. So, and they said, my wife, my first wife, she was a school teacher, and she said that she used to watch girls, and that the cleverest girls, it was a co-educational school that she was teaching in, and she said she could see the girls at 10 or 11 saying, at no point am I being intelligent. That's not going to get me anywhere, so I'm going to start pretending to be stupid. And that was fine for the boys, because then they could relax a bit.
Well,
what was the question? I've forgotten the question.
Doesn't matter, because we have a bit short of time. I'm going to jump from your traumatic, happy childhood to the present, to your actual age, 71. A very respected writer, widely read. I would like to know, what does age bring to your writing?
Well, I can do it a little bit better than I did when I started to write when I was about 12. I'm still practicing. I'm still hoping to learn how to do it. It doesn't make me any more wise. It makes me less wise. I'm turning into an old fool, which I sort of rather like. I like the notion of being an old fool. I'll be allowed all kinds of things. One of the wonderful things, by the way, about being my age is that one can be wonderfully intimate with younger women. I just mean, waitresses and people that you meet. You can put your hand on their arm, and if I did that if she's 25 and I'm 25 and I did that, there would have to be something to follow that. Now, women just say, oh, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. So I love that. And of course, being in Spain, it's marvelous that I get to kiss women all the time. You've seen somebody an hour ago and they come along and you get to kiss them again. So being silly, that's one of the very few advantages of being old. Yeats said, why should not all men be mad? And I think that's absolutely right. He meant mad in the sense of crazy.
Well, so let's go into the crazy last part of the interview. We are going to go briefly over politics, over the present time. I'm sure that age must bring a more serene perspective on the world. So, I don't know, I want to set it right, so I'm going to read it. I don't know if you are following events in Catalonia, where the regional government declared a very short-lived republic. You, as an Irishman, know the reality of a divided country. What do you think about nationalism?
Well, it would be very presumptuous of me to make statements on your present crisis. It seems to me quite serious, and I have great sympathy with you. I can only say that in Ireland, nationalism brought us nothing but 30, 35 years of extreme warfare, internecine slaughter of innocents for absolutely nothing. There was no resolution to it. I remember, you know, the author Colm Tóibín, who was quite courageous. And when Ian Paisley, who was an extremely bigoted Protestant, at the end of the war, he became Prime Minister of Northern Ireland. And Colm Tóibín was telling me that he was at dinner with one of the IRA leaders, and he said to him, so that was what the war was for, to get that bigot elected Prime Minister? Well done, well done. There is no, nationalism is a poison, and it's also self-delusion. I'll tell you a light little anecdote. I was on holiday in County Cork, down in the south of Ireland, and I went into a shop, a grocer's shop, which was about 2 kilometres from the border with the next county, which is Kerry. And we were making conversation, and I have no interest in sport, but the shopkeeper mentioned that there was going to be a big All-Ireland match, football match or something next day, and Kerry was playing Dublin, right? So we're in Cork, like 2 kilometres from the border with Kerry, and that part of the country, you know, hates Dublin, right? So I said to him, well, of course, you'll be for Kerry. And he said, oh, no. You couldn't trust those Kerry people. I'd be for Dublin. He's living 2 kilometres away from the next county. And the borders were drawn by British Army Ordnance Survey back in the 19th century. So the borders between these counties are arbitrary. Where does nationalism stop, you know? People living beside each other, are they going to hate each other because this is my little bit of territory, that's your little bit of territory? They're just the same as we are. They're, you know, the Kerry people and the Cork people are not different. So I'm all for union. I've always been a European. I have no sense of nationalism. Maybe I should have, but I feel as much at home in Spain or in outer Mongolia as I do in Ireland. It's pure chance that I was born in Ireland. I like being there. I love our version of the English language. I love the climate. I think it's the best climate in the world. Everybody complains about it, but it's perfect. But I would be happy, as I said, out of Mongolia. I would be just as happy and unhappy as I am in Ireland. These are awful cliches or truisms, but it's all I can say. I don't feel any sense of nationalism, and I think that it is, as I've said, I think it's a poison.
John, the United Kingdom is your closest neighbour. Brexit will have a direct impact on Northern Ireland. How will this affect the Republic? your country?
I have the fond hope that Brexit would never happen. It was a total mistake. The young didn't go out and vote. The south of England didn't go out and vote. They thought, you know, as people stupidly do, they waste their vote because they think, oh, it'll go through. And Britain woke up and, you know, half the country was in absolute shock that this had happened. It's a catastrophe. It will get worse. England will be, it'll be isolated again. I remember when the Northern Irish War was going on, I had a friend who was a Northerner, and he said, at that time, the British Army was blowing up small side roads to prevent the IRA from moving bombs from the south into the north. So they were cratering all these roads. I remember him saying to me, you know, if they blow up enough of those roads, we can tear Northern Ireland off like a piece of toilet paper and throw it away.
So
that was a joke. You're allowed to laugh.
Well, Europe seems weaker and weaker. Brexit, the resurgence of nationalism, the rise of the far right, mass migration. Do you think it is the end of the utopia that was the European project?
Oh, I hope not. I hope not. I don't think so. I hope it will strengthen Europe. I'm an absolute European. I believe in Europe. I believed that we were on the way quietly to a United States of Europe. It wouldn't be called that, but it was being done by bureaucrats. And I am all in favor of bureaucracy. I love the notion that a man or woman goes into work at 9 o'clock in the morning, drudges away at his or her desk, goes and has lunch, works in the afternoon, goes home in the evening, pats his children on the head, kisses his wife, has his dinner, puts his feet up, watches television, and goes to work next day. The dangerous ones are the ones with the big idea. I know how to solve all this. You know, solve what? I know, you know, let's leave Europe. Let's kill the Jews. Let's have a civil war. The ones with the big ideas, they're the ones to fear. Give me bureaucrats any day. I love them. I don't like to have dinner with them very often, but mind you, I'll tell you, I was in Washington last week and I had dinner with our Minister for Finance, who was writing an article on the philosopher Isaiah Berlin for the Irish Times. He had about 18 people at the table. They were diplomats. Most of them were dressed in T-shirts and completely casually. They were teasing the minister. And I thought, look how far we've come. This is delightful. That kind of politics is coming into Ireland, which is relaxed and I mean, we're very lucky at the moment. We're doing well, amazingly enough. We were the first European country to vote for gay marriage, which is astonishing all of us. And we now have a prime minister who is gay, and his parents are Indians. If my parents were to come back to life, they simply would not recognize Ireland. The first thing my mother would say is, look, there are no priests, no nuns, where have they gone? And then I said to her, yes, Mum, and our Prime Minister is gay. What? And he's Indian. He's what? Isn't that wonderful? You know, people talk about immigration. I was talking to an interviewer today that, I won't go on too long. There's a street in Dublin called Moore Street, which was always a place where, it's in the center of the city, but it was a market where old ladies sold cabbages and turnips and pretty bad fruit and so on from stalls along the street. And I hadn't been there for about 30 years. And I was walking through it one day, absent-minded as usual, and I heard all this strange music. And then I looked and all the shops were now owned by Nigerians. So there was all this Nigerian music coming out. Most of the shops seemed to be places where women could have their hair done, whatever, you know, the Nigerian women have to have their hair done. I looked in these shops and here were these wonderful women with these big behinds, you know, that go out like that, and hair everywhere, and this Nigerian music playing. And the Dubliner old ladies were still there with their fruit stalls, and I thought, isn't this absolutely wonderful? Ireland has become a multi-racial country without us noticing. And I thought that there would be race riots. There weren't. The Irish just accepted it. So to my amazement, we seem in Ireland to have grown up. And when the poor old Brits leave Europe and make their catastrophic mistake, we will be the only English-speaking country in the European Union, and we will have a great deal more influence than we should have given the size of the country. So we'll be running the place, us and Mrs. Merkel, if she's still there. And the last thing I would say is, you know, people talk about the Germans, and goodness knows, they did a bit of harm in their time. But when Angela Merkel said, if we don't let these refugees in from Syria, then this is not the kind of country that I want to live in. I thought this was miraculous. To hear a German chancellor saying a thing like that. Stick with Europe and stick together. Join, don't separate.
Okay.
That's my manifesto to Spain.
I kiss you. Pues con esta nota europeísta terminamos la entrevista y lo que sí empieza ahora es el turno de preguntas. Si desean... Vale, pues hay un micrófono.
Bueno, muchas gracias por esta deliciosa velada que nos habéis dado, breve pero intensa. Le quería decir al autor de que he leído sus obras como Benjamin Black, que me encanta su forense detective. Simplemente una cosa, tenemos un poeta en España muy querido por muchos, Antonio Machado, que en su retrato personal dijo una frase que se me ha quedado grabada para siempre. En todo su retrato personal hay un verso que dice: me debéis cuanto he escrito. Transmítele, por favor, a John Banville que le debemos todo lo que le ha escrito.
Well, he likes, well, he liked the talk. He liked to talking. He loves your quirk character, your Benjamin Black novels, and he quotes a very famous Spanish writer, Antonio Machado, who wrote this verse: "You owe me all what I've written," and he wants to thank you for all you've written, all the works you've written.
That's the kind of question I love.
Dice que esa es la pregunta, el tipo de preguntas que le encantan.
Preguntarte a ti, permíteme que te dute.
Sí.
Me han parecido excelentes sus traducciones, o sea, muy pertinentes. Y sobre la cuestión vidriosa de la traducción, hay unos apuntes de Ortega y Gasset sobre la traducción y casi él afirma sobre la imposibilidad de traducir, desde que traducir es otra cosa. Y hace poco me he encontrado con una edición muy reciente de estos 3 escritores italianos que firman con el seudónimo de Booming en una de las obras ambientadas de la Revolución Francesa que se titula El ejército de los sonámbulos. Como he podido tener también en mis manos la versión italiana de estos autores, como leo italiano, he podido ver la catástrofe que se ha perpetrado en la traducción española por parte de Alfaguara de esto. Entonces, bueno, pues creo que es una profesión muy de riesgo la tuya y muy delicada. O sea que hay que tener mucho cuidado porque si no se puede destrozar una obra.
Bueno, yo voy a contestar muy brevemente, más que nada porque el protagonismo esta noche es el de John Banville. Creo efectivamente que es una profesión muy arriesgada, que es una profesión muy difícil. Lo que decía antes, que hay que mantener, uno persigue el concepto de la noción de perfección de la que antes hablaba Banville. Aquí la noción de perfección es encontrar el equilibrio dificilísimo entre ser fiel al autor, a la autora, ser fiel y al mismo tiempo tener la libertad para transmitir lo que él quiere decir. No hay traducción literal. Una traducción literal es pésima. Una lengua se transforma al pasar a otra. Por eso es tan difícil, porque uno tiene que conservar el espíritu del autor original transformándolo sin alejarse. Por eso cada traducción es distinta. Si la traducción fuera una ciencia, todas las traducciones de una misma obra serían iguales. Respecto a lo de la traducción de la editorial Alfaguara, te remito a cuando salgamos. Tienes aquí a la editora de Alfaguara y lo podéis hablar, que yo creo que es mejor. ¿Os parece? Y así permitimos que... Sí, pues luego lo habláis así a la salida, que es mejor. Por si hay alguien que tenga una pregunta para John Banville.
I absolutely agree.
Mr. Banville, a question in English, if that's okay. You've written excellent novels, as has been said here before, on astronomers, scientists, Dr. Copernicus, Kepler. Have you ever thought about writing a similar historical novel about Galileo and the whole idea of recanting what you think is true, what you perceive as true, under the in the case of Galileo, the institution of the Catholic Church recanting Galileo?
Nuria mentioned George Steiner earlier, and I remember having dinner with him many years ago, and he said, we, and George always speaks in the royal plural, he said, we liked your Copernicus and your Kepler. You're not going to write about Galileo, are you? I couldn't have written about Galileo because he was a technical scientist. His greatness lay in his experiments. The greatness of Copernicus and Kepler rested in the imaginative leaps that they took. So I wasn't interested in Galileo. The notion that you mentioned of his recantation, of his beliefs, that would have been interesting. But you know, I'm sure you know that when Galileo renounced his, and he said, you know, I renounce all my form, in order to save his life, I renounce all my former beliefs. And as he was standing up, he said, but it still moves. That would be the bit I'd like to write about, that his recantation of his recantation. But Galileo himself, I never found sympathetic. Kepler was he was such a wonderful creature, full of silliness and business. He reminded me of myself, a little man rushing about, trying to keep everything in control. And he wrote again and again to Galileo, and Galileo never, ever once replied to him. So I couldn't have written about such an unsympathetic character. But I like your idea of writing about renunciation. but that I'm too old to renounce anything.
I was wondering whether Irish is so important for you. Are you able to write in Irish?
No, because the Irish language was beaten out of us when we were in school. The country, when we became independent in the 1920s, the country was taken over by ideologues, fascists essentially. And one of the great ideological aims was to reimpose Irish as the national language. This couldn't be done. The language was gone by then. But we were forced to learn it. We were forced to learn it as if it were a form of mathematics. There was no sense in which it was playful or beautiful. And also, you could get 100% in every subject in your examinations. If you failed Irish, you failed the exam. So this was an ideology, an ideological campaign, and we hated it. Now I deeply, deeply regret that, but you know, I'm claiming that it wasn't my fault. It was the fault of the ideologues. Ideology, the forcing of nationalistic notions on a people, especially on children, is a great crime. So we lost this beautiful, beautiful language. And one of the wonderful things about the Irish language is it's the complete opposite of German. You know, there's a wonderful cartoon that I saw in a German newspaper where one man is strangling another. When the man who's doing the strangling is absolutely furious. But the man who's being strangled is completely calm. And the caption is, he's waiting for the verb. Right? Because, you know, in German, the verb always comes at the end of the sentence. In Irish, it's the opposite. The verb comes at the beginning of the sentence. Now, I can imagine. But the strange thing is that two of the greatest scholars of the Irish language were German. So maybe they found something in, you know, this complete reversal. But Irish is a very beautiful language, and when I hear it spoken by native speakers, it's like listening to music. It's like listening to a lost music. It's very sad, but it's gone.
Le habrá preguntado muchas veces. El éxito de su patólogo forense en las series de la televisión han influido de alguna forma en su forma de escribir y han influido también en el conocimiento ya no de las obras de Benjamin Black, sino también en la otra versión de su personalidad literaria, la de John Banville.
When Benjamin Black was adapted into television, did this adaptation influence your writing of Benjamin Black, and did it influence as well your writing as John Banville?
No. I had nothing to do with the television series, absolutely nothing. I had no connection with it, except that I wrote the original books. Which is quite nice, because I couldn't be blamed for it. Television screenwriting is a completely different medium. When I wrote my first Benjamin Black book, Christine Falls, I adapted it from a television script that I had written that wasn't going to be made into a film. And I found that I had to rewrite every single line of dialogue because I had to flatten it. I had to write white, as they say. When you're writing with a screen, you have to write without flourishes, without any literary aspect at all. Because the flesh and the blood of the thing is going to be given to it by the actors, by the director, by the photographer, by the makeup artist, by nothing to do with me. I love writing for the screen, because apart from anything else, it's so easy. You don't have to do all the hard stuff in between the dialogue. You write this very flat dialogue. And then it's a great thrill to hear your dialogue spoken by living human beings, if actors are human beings. But anyway, let's assume they are for the moment. It's a delight. It's a kind of childish play. I love the movies. I like television. But I could spend my life happily writing scripts. I've written dozens of scripts. Very few of them get made. That's one of the nice things about writing scripts. You write the script, you get paid for it, and then it doesn't get made. So you don't have the embarrassment of seeing it on the screen. But it has no influence, no connection with my prose writing.
La última novela que se ha publicado en España de Benjamin Black se ha publicado con el título de Pecado, cuando el título original en inglés es Snow, nieve. ¿Qué opina el autor de estos cambios de título que en principio parecen un poco, no sé si arbitrarios o gratuitos?
The novel that won the RBA Prize, the original title was Snow, but here it was translated as Sin. What do you think about this title changing?
I don't know Spanish, therefore I can't judge. I have to trust that this is the right decision. I can't, I mean...
No es la suya. Me está diciendo, es que en primera fila tenemos a la editora de John Banville, María Fase de Alfaguara, y me está diciendo que probablemente cambiaron el título porque hay una novela de Orhan Pamuk, el escritor turco, el Nobel turco, que se llama Nieve. Puede que sea eso, puede.
But I can tell you that when I published a novel on the astronomer Kepler, and the title of the novel was Kepler, one day in the post came a book called, from Italy, came a book called Il vino e le stelle by John Banville. And I thought, what's this? And they had changed the title without consulting me. So the book that I'd called Kepler, they changed to The Wine and the Stars. God, dreadful title. And I wrote to them and I said, look, it's as if I had sent my son George to boarding school, and he came home at Easter with a note from the headmaster saying, we've changed his name to Aubrey. They could at least have asked me. I probably would have said yes, but they could have asked me. But, you have to trust that your meaning is getting across in a foreign language. There's again, the interpreters, well, you should be able to do this. There was an English working class novel of the 1950s called Room at the Top. And room at the top means, there's always room at the top for an ambitious boy, an ambitious working class boy can get to the top. It was translated into Swedish as the attic.
Good evening. Have you ever had any teacher who gave importance to creativity or arts in your education?
I had a wonderful English teacher when I was at school. When I was in higher school, when I was 13, 14. And he and I started in the school on the same day. So I was in his class and he was doing his first day's teaching. And I could see him looking out over the sea of faces and thinking, he was in a panic. And he said, all right, we'll start with Keats's great poem, Ode to a Nightingale. And he caught my eye and he said, you start reading it. And I knew the poem by heart. So I held the book, but and after the first stanza, he said, all right, sit down. And he and I were going to be friends from then on. Because it must have thrilled him that his first pupil knew the bloody poem before he asked him to read it. He was a great... teachers don't teach. Teachers teach you to teach yourself. The best teachers say, here, you do it. And he was good for that. He was wonderful for that. And I remember him with great gratitude. He let me teach myself. But if you're saying, was I inspired? We inspire ourselves. We're not inspired by other people.
Bueno, muchas gracias a todos. Ahora, si desean que les firme los libros, él va a estar fuera. No sé si han visto que hay una mesa con sus novelas. Él estará allí para la firma. Muchas gracias.